thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to see so many young people. I want you to indulge me in just, you young folks, let me pretend that I'm your mother today. Because my older son, who just turned 27, is somewhere on I-10, driving from New Orleans to Jacksonville to begin his brand new life as a brand new doctor. And my maternal feelings are a little bit churned up at the moment, so I'm so glad to see so many young people. I want to set a tone for this talk. And Lauren said she would like for me, after you'd been working hard all morning, to, do something a little fun and, entertaining. So hopefully that's what we'll be doing today, partly informative. And am I supposed to be wearing something? Or is this okay if I talk this thing? Okay. All right. Okay. So how many people have heard of intelligent design creationism? So you know what that is. How many people know who William Dembski is? He's one of the leading intellectuals of the movement, one of the founders of the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture. Okay, so you know who he is. And you know what the Kitzmiller trial is, right? And the judge gave his decision on December 20th, 2005. Well, what I'm going to show you now, before I actually begin my real presentation, is how William Dembski marked the first anniversary of the Kitzmiller decision. This came out shortly before Christmas of last year. Now, look, listen, because there are sound effects, okay? And there's a really good sound system. Did you hear it? Did you get all the sound effects? Does anyone need to hear it again? Okay, let's do it again. Listen one more time, because the sound effect of a particular body function is what you want to get. So we'll do it again. Okay, so now you know what to listen for. No, like I said, I want to set a tone for this presentation. And the sound effects continue as you pass your cursor along there. There's me, by the way. There's Richard Dawkins, Eugenie Scott, and my friend Ken Miller. Now, the voice that you're hearing is William Dembski's. Some of you geeks out there probably know how to do what a geek at Pandas Thumb did, and do an analysis of the voice, and which was slowed down, speed it up, and match it with Dembski's voice. And once he did that and posted it, Dembski admitted that it was his voice. This is one of the people who's going to revolutionize the scientific world. This is his work. So, okay. Yes, that would be nice. So now that the tone is set, we will go into my presentation. Yeah? You want me to move that? And we can push this out of the way. Okay. All right, can you hear me? No, I think she has to do something, just to adjust the volume, right? Okay, how's that? Can you hear me? That's okay? Oh, I can hear myself, so that, okay, right, great. Okay, well, I'm going to use the Trojan horse as my motif, and you'll see that it's really a very, very good metaphor for what is going on here, and give you a little bit of closer look at the intelligent design movement. You all know the ancient legend of the Trojan horses, which is a wonderful story that we've all heard as children, and probably a not so good movie. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Might be worth going just to look at Brad Pitt. So, It's also the name for a nanoparticle that's been developed to deliver cancer drugs to tumors, which is interesting, I think. It's also the name of a really good book, which is on sale outside, which is a little cheaper than I have it listed here. It's out there for $15. I think Oxford is selling it for $19.95, but it does have a new chapter, which includes the Dover trial and some other updated information. But really the most apt use of this metaphor is the computer program that looks very benign, called a Trojan horse. It's not a worm and it's not a virus. It's a piece of it's a program. And I'll just, what it says here is, and I found this on the website at the bottom there, a Trojan horse is a program that appears to have some useful or benign purpose, but really masks some hidden or malicious code. In this case, the Trojan horse and the unsuspecting user become the entry vehicle for the malicious software on the system. Remember the attacker's main goal, to disguise their malicious code so that users of the system and other programs running on the system do not realize what the attacker is up to. Well, I found out I think that works really, really well to describe now, Trojan horse metaphor, that was Oxford University Press's idea. I didn't like the title at first, but it's turned out to work really well. A Trojan horse is a proposal to, quote, teach the controversy about evolution that appears to have some useful or benign purpose, for example, to promote critical thinking. All of this is what the Discovery Institute says, by the way, but really masks the plan to teach intelligent design creationism. In this case, the Trojan horse and the public school system become the Discovery Institute's entry vehicle for teaching a religious belief in the public school science class. So the federal judges do not realize what the ID movement is up to. And thanks to Judge Jones, that's a bit more difficult than it used to be. But they're still at it, as you will see. And the Trojan horse rolled into Dover, Pennsylvania in October of 2004. Now, it wasn't the Discovery Institute. In fact, this lawsuit was the last thing they wanted. They did not initiate it, and they could not control it, and I explain more about their reluctance to see this suit go forward in the book, but they didn't want it. It was really the two guys on the school board, and they were assisted by the Thomas More Law Center, and I'll get into that in a second, but these are our wonderful plaintiffs. I only have pictures of a few of them, not all of them, but Tammy Kitzmiller was the lead plaintiff. It was she who filed the initial complaint. Her daughters went to go to Dover High School. So these are the heroic people in this whole business here. And Dover's a very picturesque little town. It's near Gettysburg. And you can see that it's just a really beautiful place. There's the Dover Area High School. So it's just a picture-perfect setting, but this little town got ripped apart during this ordeal. What the school board did at the instigation of a couple of the board members was in October 2004 to pass a resolution ordering that 9th grade biology students would be taught about intelligent design, that they would be made aware of gaps or problems in Darwin's theory, which is classic creationist talk. And then the next month, they put Of Pandas and People, a creationist textbook, in the library for their students to consult. One of the board members, William Buckingham, actually tried to blackmail the teachers into accepting this as a supplemental textbook, Pandas, you'll hear more about that later, in order to get them their new standard biology book, and that just didn't fly, and so they put it in the library as a reference book. 58 copies, 60 were purchased, 58 went into the library. And so those parents filed suit. Now this is the book Of Pandas and People. The two board members who instigated all of this, and this really started in 2002. This didn't start in 2004. They had been agitating for the teaching of creationism for 2 years. Alan Bonsell and William Buckingham took up the money at Buckingham's church, gave it to Bonsell's father to buy the book under the table to keep it off the books of the school board. And so they bought Pandas, and note the co-author there, Dean H. Kenyon, along with Percival Davis. These are the co-authors of the book. Dean Kenyon's name will come up in a little while. And so this generated a great deal of publicity, controversy. Dover became the butt of jokes. The campaign to defend the Constitution added it to their map of the islands of ignorance. There it is. There's Dover there. A lot of cartoons. And Samantha Bee, you probably saw this maybe, did a little spot on The Daily Show called Until Hell Freezes Dover. And I can't imagine, having seen it, I can't imagine that it made the people that live in Dover very happy that she did this. But it did make Dover the butt of just gazillions of jokes and cartoons. Now, ultimately, even though the Discovery Institute did not instigate the lawsuit, now they wanted a lawsuit, they wanted one for a long time, but they didn't want one there. They wanted one either in Kansas or Ohio, where they thought they could control everything. They didn't want it there. That popped up out of left field. But ultimately, all of this is because of their efforts. In 1990, the Discovery Institute was established as a conservative think tank in Seattle. In 1996, they established the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, which is now called the Center for Science and Culture. There is Bruce Chapman, who founded both entities, doing what he does best, talking to the media. They're on the Lehrer NewsHour. There in the middle is Stephen Meyer, a historian and philosopher of science, who is the director of the Center for Science and Culture. In the lower left-hand corner is probably its most famous figure to the public, is Michael Behe, who wrote Darwin's Black Box, and he's got a new book out. William Dembski, who gave us that wonderful little animated cartoon, whose book, Intelligent Design, The Bridge Between Science and Theology, explains intelligent design to the lay audience in overtly religious terms. There is Philip Johnson in the lower right with one of their ardent supporters, Chuck Colson, the convicted Watergate felon, who runs Prison Fellowship Ministries. I'm sure you probably heard of that. And there is Jonathan Wells. He's one of the founders of this little group, too. He's one of the founding members, standing in front of the Unification Theological Seminary. You probably know what that place is. He calls Reverend Sun Myung Moon his father, spiritual father, and so he has a degree from there. But Reverend Moon asked him to go get a PhD in biology so that he could devote his life to destroying Darwinism. And there he is in the state of Ohio in March 2002 doing his best to destroy Darwinism, trying to persuade the Ohio Board of Education to adopt intelligent design into the teaching standards, the science standards. So here you have the people who are ultimately responsible for what happened in Dover. And they have a strategy called the wedge strategy. And Philip Johnson came up with this based on the metaphor of the wood-splitting wedge. The idea is to create an opening in the public mind, the public understanding of science, to allow the supernatural or God as a scientific explanation. And this is what they call the wedge strategy. With Philip Johnson's work beginning in 1991 as the thin end of the wedge, with the younger members of the movement coming in his wake, having created an opening for them in the public mind and with public policymakers. So, and this strategy is outlined in a document known informally as the wedge document, or called the wedge. Many of you may know Jim Still with Internet Infidels, a very nice man who I think wrote one of the first articles on this document when it surfaced on the internet in 1999. It is the strategy of the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture over a period of 20 years. There are 3 phases: scientific research, writing, and publicity. Phase 2, publicity and opinion making. Phase 3, cultural confrontation and renewal. They've done every part of this strategy except the science. There you see the leaker, Matt Duss, whose identity was not divulged until after the Kitzmiller trial was over and we had the judge's decision. But Tim Rhodes posted the document on the web in '99, and he gave, I think I'm the first person to whom he gave a copy of the original scanned version. So it became the foundation of my research that led to the publication of my book. Now, and the publication of the book, Creationism's Trojan Horse, is what got me called into the trial as an expert witness. And so I was deposed in New Orleans on June 6th, 2005, which is my son who's moving, that was his birthday. Richard Thompson, who's the director of the Thomas More Law Center, which was founded with Tom Monahan of Domino's Pizza, very conservative religious right legal organization, he deposed me, and he also questioned me at the trial. There's Eric Rothschild from Pepper Hamilton Law Firm, who worked with me to prepare me for my testimony. And so in the room with us during my deposition was William Dembski, who looked about like he looks in this picture during the entire length of his presence there. He glowered at me across the table, and so he was there at my deposition. So this took place on June 6th. Now, a month before that, almost exactly a month, Dembski had written on his Uncommon Dissent blog, he was really talking tough. He says, what I would really like to have is a strategy for interrogating the Darwinists to squeeze the truth out of them. And he called this his vice strategy, and there's a little picture of Darwin with his head being squished in a vice grip. Now, Dembski was due to be deposed exactly 1 week after I was. He was due to be deposed on June 13th, 2005, and I want you to remember that little item of information. It'll be relevant in a little bit. Anyway, so as you know, I was, you know about Hurricane Katrina, everybody knows about that. So while we were still suffering from the effects of Hurricane Katrina, the Thomas More Law Center filed a motion in limine to have me kicked out of the case. I was the only person on the plaintiff's side, that they tried to get kicked off the case. And so they filed a brief which said, and Dembski's fingerprints are all over this, that she's little more than a conspiracy theorist and a web-surfing cyberstalker of the Discovery Institute. Now, officially, they were trying to get me disqualified under the Supreme Court ruling Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals, 1993, in which the court ruled that judges have to decide whether or not the scientists who are expert witnesses have used the proper scientific methodology, and they have to do this at the beginning of the testimony. And of course, I wasn't brought in as a scientist, so it didn't apply to me. But the judge denied that motion. And so when he denied the motion, they filed it on the 6th of September. I'm sitting in my house about all this time. I was without power for 9 days, and I was sitting in a south window of my house trying to get enough light to prepare for the trial. And so while all this is going on. And so I want you to remember what you're going to see. After the judge denied the motion on the 22nd of September, the Discovery Institute weighed in on this, but I want you to remember that these are the people who are claiming that intelligent design is a full-scale revolution. There's Dembski in 2004, and there, right before the trial began, Stephen Meyer says we're in the very initial stages of a scientific revolution. Well, I was sitting in my office, which was the only place where the lights were back on and where it was air-conditioned, preparing to go to, well, we had a second hurricane, Rita. And so I couldn't get out of Baton Rouge. So I was reading the website of the Discovery Institute, and I saw where they had posted the transcript of a radio interview that I had done, except that I had not done it. It's a fake interview with me and a fictitious host named Marvin Waldberg, in which they refer to me as Dr. Barking Forest. So that's why I have the title Dr. Barking Forest Cyberstalker. So this is just kind of one of the little funny things that they did prior to the trial starting, actually, right before I left to go up there. The first half of the first day of my time on the stand, the Thomas More Law Center is still trying to get me disqualified, but the judge, kind of funny, called me a hybrid expert historian, and he allowed me to stay into the case, and I testified for a day and a half. These were our expert witnesses, the plaintiffs. I'm one of them, of course, with Robert Pinnock, who's a philosopher, Kevin Padian, who's a paleontologist, Ken Miller, cell biologist, John Haught, a theologian, Brian Alters, somebody talked about Dr. Alters today, he's a science education expert, and Jeffrey Shallett, who was brought in as a rebuttal, he's a computer scientist who was brought in as a rebuttal witness to Dembski, but Jeff didn't get to do that, and you'll see why in a minute. The consultants for the plaintiffs' attorneys of the National Center for Science Education, there is Nick Matsky, who was there for the entire 6 weeks of the trial. And there's a nice little book that has come out after the trial. It's a handbook for activists, which incorporates what was learned at the trial. So if any of you are interested, this is a very nice little book. And all of the trial documents are on the NCSC's website, if you're interested. And these are our wonderful attorneys, Stephen Harvey and Eric Rothschild from Pepper Hamilton, Vic Waljak of the Pennsylvania ACLU, and Richard Katsky of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. So this was our team. Now these were the expert witnesses for the defendants. William Dembski, of course, Michael Behe, William Dembski, Warren Nord, who is an ID sympathizer at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm not quite sure what he does. It has something to do with education or something. And religion. Dick Carpenter, who had worked for Focus on the Family, was to be their counterpart to Brian Alters, their science education expert. John Angus Campbell, who teaches rhetoric at University of Memphis. Stephen Meyer from the Discovery Institute. Steve Fuller, an American who teaches sociology at University of Warwick in England. And Scott Minnick, who teaches molecular biology at the University of Idaho. Well, Dembski was due to be deposed on June 13th. Dembski backed out just a few days before he was to be deposed. So did Stephen Meyer, so did John Angus Campbell. They wanted their own attorneys. They had heard all of the major expert witnesses' deposition. They knew what we would say. They had our reports. They knew exactly what we would say. They wanted to be represented by their own independent attorneys. The Thomas More Law Center said no, and so they backed out. And I think they were really fearful of being cross-examined. After they heard the testimony, the deposition testimony, they did not want to be on the witness stand. And so Warren Nord was withdrawn without explanation, didn't get to testify, so was Dick Carpenter. So that left only these three people. Behe, Steve Fuller, and Scott Minnick were the only expert witnesses the defense had. And they were the best expert witnesses we could have had. They helped us enormously. Especially when Eric Rothschild got Behe to admit that under Behe's definition of scientific theory, astrology would also qualify, along with intelligent design. It was one of those sort of MasterCard moments, priceless. So my tasks were we really had to educate the judge. He had had our expert witness reports and all of that, but we had to go to court and literally walk him through the case. So my job was to show him the wedge strategy, explain that intelligent design, establish for him that intelligent design is both religious, a religious movement, and is creationism, and also to discuss pandas, the textbook. Those were my two major tasks. And so what I did, I literally walked him. We had a big projection screen. This judge was known not to like technology in his courtroom too much, but he's now, I think, very, very glad that we did this. He let us do it. And we had a projection screen, and I literally walked him through the document. I showed him, for example, the opening statement. The proposition that human beings are created in the image of God is one of the bedrock principles on which Western civilization was built. You can see right there that the intelligent design movement thinks of itself. This was an internal document that was going to be used for fundraising. It was going to go out to potential donors. They are describing their movement to their own potential donors, to their supporters. So it shows us that they view this as a religious effort. It's grounded in religion. Also, I showed him that one of the steps that they would take to carry out the phases of their strategy was to use apologetics seminars to spread the word about intelligent design. And apologetics is, you probably know it, it's the defense of Christianity against attacks. And so they were this is a very, very overtly religious concept that they were using to explain how they plan to promote intelligent design. And so I showed all that to the judge. I showed him this quote from Dembski from 1999 in which he defines intelligent design. Well, to the public, they say it's a cutting-edge new scientific theory. But when they're speaking to their own followers, they talk very candidly. And he defined intelligent design as the logos theology of John's gospel, restated in the idiom of information theory, which makes intelligent design not just religious, but Christian. It's a sectarian Christian concept. It's founded not on the book of Genesis, because they don't want to fight with the young earthers about the age of the earth. They moved it over to the first book of John. It's a very minimalist account of the Logos creating the world. The Logos is Jesus Christ, by the way. And Philip Johnson, defines intelligent design as theistic realism. Mere creation, the defining concept of the movement. This means that we affirm that God is objectively real as creator and that his handiwork can be empirically detected in biology. I told this to the judge. I also gave him another just priceless moment. I was sitting in the law office one day and Eric told me to entertain myself while he went and did the type of law that pays his bills for a little while. And so I was reading a copy of Touchstone magazine. It was a 5th anniversary issue. They had done a special issue. Touchstone is a Christian magazine. They had done a 1999 special issue on ID, and they were doing a 2004 anniversary issue, and they interviewed most of the major people in the movement. And Paul Nelson, who is a young earth creationist, he's the liaison into the young earth community, was asked what was the biggest challenge facing the intelligent design movement. Now keep in mind, this is 12 years after the wedge strategy is implemented in 1992. He says the biggest challenge is getting a theory. We don't have such a theory right now, and that's a real problem. Without a theory, it's very hard to know how to focus, where to direct your research. Right now, we've got a bag of powerful intuitions. Now, these intuitions he's talking about are the two central planks in the scientific platform of intelligent design. A handful of notions such as irreducible complexity, that's Michael Behe's signature contribution, and specified complexity, which is Dembski's. But he said, as yet, we've got no general theory of biological design. So I'm sitting in this big conference room in the great big Pepper Hamilton building thinking to myself, now isn't this special? You know, I just could not believe my good luck. I finally got a chance to read that for the first time. They're waiting for Eric. And so I communicated this little piece to the judge. I also showed him that they described themselves as creationists back in 1995 when they were really before the Center for Science and Culture was started. They had a conference. Their first conference was at Southern Methodist University in '92. And Mark Hartwig, focused on the family employee who was also working with them with the Discovery Institute, wrote an article from Moody Magazine. It was a Baptist magazine, calling Dembski et al. A breed of young evangelical scholars, like Stephen Meyer, you see at the bottom. And he referred to them as creationists and evolutionists. They had, Michael Ruse was there, I think, and they had some other scientists there to get a platform with these people. And he referred to the ID people as creationists, and so I communicated this to the judge. This is why it's very helpful to have a library with a good archives, which we have at NCSE, like you have a library here, because this information was in our archives. And I had made a chart for Eric to use, and we used part of this in court. It's on my website at www.creationismstrojanhorse.com. It's a little document I made from creation science to intelligent design, showing how intelligent design comes directly out of earlier creationism, using quotes from Henry Morris in the 1970s through the 1980s into intelligent design in the 80s and the 90s, showing that they're doing exactly the same thing, except for the young Earth part. And so we used part of that, several parts of that chart. This is just one part where you see Henry Morris saying that evolution is not a fact. It's neither a fact or a theory nor a hypothesis. And then you have Mark Hartwig and Stephen Meyer in Of Pandas and People saying the same thing, that evolution only in the most trivial sense could it be considered a fact. And there are many, many, many examples just like this, and we used several of them in court. So this is the type of evidence that I presented to the judge. And remember Dean Kenyon, who was the co-author of Pandas? Okay, he really has been a very quiet, low-profile figure in this movement, but he turned out to be one of the central people in my testimony as co-author of Pandas, but also as the person in whom you can literally see the creation science movement morph into the intelligent design movement. In 1980, he was in trouble at San Francisco State University because he was teaching creationism to his freshman biology students. And so there's an article from the Lexington Leader, Kentucky, on December 18, 1980. He was a creation scientist. Consciously so. He filed a sworn affidavit as a creation scientist in 1984 in the Edwards versus Aguillard case. And in his sworn affidavit, he speaks as a creation scientist when he says that it's based on my professional opinion that creation science is just as scientific as evolution. This is in '84, and of course this case produced the Edwards versus Aguillard ruling, Supreme Court ruling in 1987, outlawing the balanced treatment of evolution by teaching creation science. So he was functioning as a creation scientist, self-described creation scientist. He was co-author. While he was working on this very case, he was helping to write Pandas, which is one of the things I discovered in the subpoenaed documents. Documents were subpoenaed from the Foundation for Thought and Ethics that holds the copyright to Pandas. And I found a letter that he had written in '86. He was working on the Edwards case and writing Pandas at the same time. By 1997, he had morphed into an intelligent design proponent, and he was one of the early fellows of the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, which is now the Center for Science and Culture. And of course, in 2000, in an interview, he actually says that scientific creationism, which in its modern phase began in the early 1960s, is actually one of the intellectual antecedents of the intelligent design movement. Now, you would think they write all this stuff, and I guess they think nobody's Well, I guess it's true. There are very few people, like, crazy philosophers in Louisiana who are going to sit behind a computer for thousands of hours and dig this stuff up. But I guess they thought they could write it and nobody but their followers would read it while I read it. And you can... So you can see the morphing of the movement in this one man, and we brought that out to the judge. And Kenyon's very reclusive. It was very hard even to find that picture. So now what about pandas? We wanted to see if there was something that would really clinch the deal on pandas. Pandas is an intelligent design creationist book, and the Discovery Institute, of course, denies that it's a creationist book. In the archives at NCSC, one of the staff there found a little clipping in a student creationist newspaper in which Charles Thaxton, one of the Discovery Institute creationists, was advertising for someone to come in to help write a creationist book that would present both creation and evolution. And that tiny little clipping tipped off the attorneys that there might be that might have been the beginning of pandas, and there might be early drafts. And so they subpoenaed the Foundation for Thought and Ethics to produce all documents connected with that book. And so I have 7,000 pages of confidential documents in my office, which is what we got. And it turned out that there were 5. They had kept all of the drafts. They didn't shred anything. They kept everything. And so there were at least 5 drafts. One is 1983, the Creation Biology Textbook Supplement. 1986, Biology and Creation Field Test Copy. 1987, Biology and Origins. 1987, renamed Of Pandas and People. Now, this is the creationist version. What marks all of these drafts is that they were written in overtly creationist language. Creationist, creationism, creation biology. All of the cognates of that term were in the text. But we had a second 1987 version that had been cleansed of that terminology. And it turns out that, in other words, instead of saying creation science or creationism, they're saying intelligent design, design proponents, blah, blah. So that was a huge thing. That was a huge thing that we found. And notice, this is 1987. Remember what came down in 1987? Edwards versus Aguillard on June 19th. And what I found was a note in the introduction of the 1987 versions referencing Edwards, indicating that they had taken account of it. So what we did was to make a timeline for the judge, showing him the 1987 version, the first of Pandas and People, is written in creationist language. In fact, creation is defined, and this is very important, you'll see why, as the abrupt beginning of life, that life began abruptly and animals were fully formed with all of their features intact, fins and feathers and all of that. And then the second 1987 version, after the Edwards decision came down, you see Edwards at the top there, you see the case there on the timeline. That's where we see intelligent design language substituted, and then that's the way it's published in 1993. So what we found was that creation was defined exactly the same way in every single draft, but in the 1987, the second draft, the post-Edwards draft, for creation was substituted intelligent design. That was the only change in the definition at all. That was the only change. And I was actually sitting in my office one day going through some of those drafts, and I found there one of them. Now, this is not one we used in court, ironically, but the word creationist, what they had done, they had switched over from typewriters in the 83 version to word processors in the late 80s when we all started getting computers and stuff, you know. And they went into the draft and were doing a search and replace. And somebody, maybe they hadn't had enough coffee or something, because in one of them, this is what I found. So I immediately called the National Center for Science Education and told them, and they went and looked in their draft, and they were the ones who dubbed it the missing link. I mean, that's just, along with the birth of my 2 sons, it's one of life's great moments for me. So it was really and we didn't even use this in court. I mean, can you imagine? All right. So anyway, our resident geeks at the NCSC got one of the raw drafts of the company had the law firm had hired a company to scan the text of pandas and just put it in ASCII text, which is unformatted. And so our staff at NCSC did a word count of the use of the term creationism and all the cognates in the pre-Edwards version, and that's represented by the red line. And there we have Pandas version 2, and where they had substituted the intelligent design language. Now you see that the use of creationism language is very high in the early version, and the references to design are very low. Well, this is what happened in the 1987 post-Edwards version. This is, and we use this as one of the graphics that we used. If you want this, it's not exactly like this. It doesn't have the little pop-up things, but it's on my website, and you can get this for yourself if you want it. So this is what Nick Matsky, one of our staff at NCSC, called the smoking gun. So, needless to say, we won this case, and those are our plaintiffs, our wonderful plaintiffs. I couldn't be up there at the time, but when they were there waiting, they knew when the ruling was due, and they were all up there at the law office in Harrisburg waiting, and it was a wonderful moment for them. And it was actually kind of poignant because this had ripped their little community apart. It's a very small town. But we did win, thanks to a wonderful judge who was appointed by George W. Bush in 2002. Yes. Who disappointed who have now people who have become his political detractors and literally abided by the Constitution. And the Discovery Institute responses were interesting. Dembski's was appropriate and very consistent. He says they were going to be raising a lot more money now because it was going to galvanize the Christian community. And John West, who has taken a major profile at the Discovery Institute with them now, has accused the judge of being an activist with delusions of grandeur. And indeed, the judge received threats. He and his family were under armed guard over the Christmas holidays after he handed down his opinion. The federal marshals were concerned enough to put him and his family under armed guard for a little bit. But Dembski was very well remunerated. This is what he got out of the deal, which was a lot more than I got, which was expenses. Which was all I agreed to do this pro bono. Our side did everything pro bono. The lawyers didn't get paid. All they did was charge for the hard. They wrote off 2/3 of the costs of this trial, and they only charged the Dover School Board what they had to charge to pay the hard costs of the trial, and the board had to pay $1 million out of pocket, out of current operating funds. But the thing was, it was the new board. It was the good guys who had taken the board in the November 8th election. They were the ones, not the ones who started the trouble, but they're the ones who had to pay the bill. Okay. And so Dembski, being his typical self, has really been nasty about the judge. You can see, if you know what putz means, I will not explain it, but ask somebody who speaks Yiddish and they'll tell you what it means. And he's been quite nasty about the judge, which is pretty typical. But the judge, of course, had the last laugh when he declared that this was unconstitutional and that the opinion speaks for itself when he was interviewed just a couple of months after he handed down his. But it's not over. It's not over. There's a little bit more. I've found even more recently evidence to show, more to show that intelligent design comes directly out of earlier creationism. This is Norman Geisler, who is a creationist of old. And I think he's an old earther, actually, but he is a very well-known creationist who in 1982 used the term complex specified information, which is supposedly William Dembski's signature contribution to intelligent design. There you see Dembski using exactly the same phrase in 1998. So this is more missing link. I mean, this is a transitional fossil here, I guess you would call it. And even Behe, Behe didn't dream up irreducible complexity. It's been around for a long time. There you have Ariel Roth, the creationist who testified in the Arkansas McLean versus Arkansas case in 1981, talking about complex integrated structures, right, in which all the parts, he was talking about things like the respiratory system, in which, if all the parts are not there, the system won't function. Well, what Behe did in his concept of irreducible complexity is just drop that down to the subcellular level. It's exactly the same concept, but he's just adapted it to, one of the newer areas of science, is molecular biology. And he's not a molecular biologist, by the way. Behe is a biochemist. So anyway, Behe has a new book out. So they continue their campaign. His new book is The Edge of Evolution, which is already being reviewed. I understand Jerry Coyne has a review of it in, I forget where it is, New Republic. And Ken Miller is going to have a review of it in the next issue of Nature, I believe, so you might want to watch for that. And there's Michael Behe being interviewed by Michael Medved, who's a very ardent supporter of intelligent design. So. And they are now operating, one of the things they started doing even before the Kitzmiller case, there was a proposal in Darby, Montana, a little kind of Dover-like town in Montana, to put intelligent design in their tiny little school system there. And there was fierce opposition, believe it or not, fierce opposition. And so what the design proponents did was to start cleansing their terminology. They were being advised by the Discovery Institute, by the way. It was working behind the scenes. And so they started backing away from the use of the term intelligent design. My book and other books have exposed it as creationism, so they really don't want that in formal policy proposals anymore. So now it's even more urgent that they do that after Kitzmiller. So now they're using code terms, none of which are new, by the way. These are old creationist code terms, been around for decades. Well, then this is new. This one is their original soundbite, teach the controversy, the idea that there's a huge controversy about evolution within science. And that's very appealing to people. Americans like this idea of letting both sides have their say. But there's only one scientific side here, we keep reminding people. But that's one of the little Trojan horses. Another little Trojan horse is academic freedom. They're doing this in the name of academic freedom. And critical analysis of evolution. These are the code terms now. If these pop up in a policy proposal before a school board, you better watch it, because that's what this is about. We've got one in Ouachita Parish in North Louisiana that's worded now in this sanitized terminology. Strengths and weaknesses of evolution. This is what they want to teach. And they also are arguing that children should be taught the arguments for and against evolution or neo-Darwinism, which is now the book to watch for. The substitute for pandas, the supplemental biology text, is Explore Evolution. Notice now how they've co-opted the evolutionary terminology. This is what they're doing. Now they've co-opted. There are a number of Explore Evolution sites on the internet which are literally, legitimately about evolution, and this can very easily be confused with one of those products. But once you look at the authors, Stephen Meyer, who wouldn't testify in the Dover trial, Paul Nelson, who's a young earth creationist, Jonathan Moneymaker, a longtime intelligent design supporter, Scott Minnick, who testified in the Dover trial, and Ralph Seelke, who's an intelligent design supporter, you know right away that this is more of the same. And if you look at the subtitle, it's written in ID code, the arguments for and against neo-Darwinism, right there. So this is another example of stealth creationism with sanitized terminology. The book attempts to undermine evolution. It doesn't talk about intelligent design, but it is based on Jonathan Wells's Icons of Evolution. It does challenge common descent, and it does have irreducible complexity in the book. So, just to give you another little updated item you might want to read, I wanted to mention this because I wrote this position paper for the Center for Inquiry, their public policy office in Washington. It's now on the centerforinquiry.net website, and it's my most recent thing I've written, updating people a little bit about the strategy that the movement is now using. And these are some other books to read. They're very good books to give you just kind of perspectives on this from a number of angles. I do recommend Michelle Goldberg's work because she puts this in the large context of Christian nationalism. These guys at the Discovery Institute do keep company with Dominionists, Christian Reconstructionists, you probably know. They're closely allied with these people. So Kingdom Coming would be a very good one for that. Another book, and I think it would be very good to read this, is by Keith Miller, who's a geologist in Kansas, a founding member of Kansas Citizens for Science, and also a devout evangelical. He's put together a beautiful anthology called Perspectives on an Evolving Creation. And I think it's very important for us as non-religious people to work with the members of the faith community who are on our side. And it's a very good way to understand them and to see how they come at this issue. This was a book of essays by evangelicals for evangelicals in which they explain the challenges of trying to reconcile their Christian faith with with doing good science. I highly recommend this book. John Haught is also a theologian who is an expert witness. I recommend reading his work. And there's a little Evolution versus Creationism, a good historical introduction by Eugenie Scott. Also, Ken Miller, who is one of our witnesses, looks at it from the standpoint of a believing scientist as well in Finding Darwin's God. And then there's the little book, Not in Our Classrooms, I already told you about. I want to end this presentation in the tone in which I began. So to end on the same note, notice how I bookended my presentation with Dembski's, Dembski helped Ann Coulter write the 4 chapters in her book Godless that are devoted to intelligent design. He was very proud of the fact that he was in constant correspondence with Ann regarding her chapters. And I just can't think of a better way to end it other than to quote him. In speaking of Ann Coulter, he calls her the wedge for the masses. Thank you.
Taking what we learned in this case to other things, it seems like our religious brothers and sisters, and especially those on the right, they sort of have a certain pattern when they're attacked, because they're not thinking the truth as we are, that there's a psychological pattern that they're using to go at each issue. Is anybody, for instance, in your thing, the personal attack on you, that's one of the things that they like to use. And I can't remember, there seemed to be a pattern through here. They use the pattern when they're attacking rights for human rights for women, human rights for gay people, and so forth. Could you comment on this? Did you find a pattern here that's in other areas that they used to obfuscate the truth?
That the Discovery Institute people used?
Well, this whole movement of
one of the things they do is to use. I think the tactics is called projection, where if you're doing something that's not a good thing to do, like something nasty or hateful, and you want to divert attention away from the fact that you're doing it, you accuse your opponent of doing it, and they do that all the time. And so that's one of the things that they do. And it's interesting you should ask me about psychological patterns, because one of the books I'm reading right now, in fact, I brought it on the plane with me, John Dean wrote a book called The Conservatives Without Conscience. I don't know if you've read that book. He didn't write it about creationism. He wrote it about, sort of the neoconservatives in Washington, trying to figure out why people like Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter are the kinds of people that they are. And he actually looked at a lot of social science research trying to explain these types of personalities. And it is really amazing how much of what he says corresponds to the way the Discovery Institute creationists behave. They are very authoritarian. They can be very mean and quite ruthless, and they've been very mean in their criticism of Judge Jones. So yes, there is a pattern, and it's not unique to them. It's unique to people who for some reason have personalities which are attracted to authoritarianism, and so yes, there are patterns that you can recognize.
Hi, I'm Guillaume from University of Montreal. And one of our teachers co-written a book with Dembski that just came out. I haven't seen it or read it, but I was assuming that maybe you were...
What's your school?
University of Montreal. The co-author was Mario Beauregard. Have you heard? It's something about neuroscience.
Yes. What?
Stuff.
Spell the last name?
Beauregard. That's B-E-A-U-R.
Beauregard?
Beauregard. Yeah, Beauregard. Yeah, Mario Beauregard. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that name because my ancestors were the ones that the Brits ran out of that part of the world, and we have the name Beauregard. And Beauregard is the co-author who wrote a book with Dembski?
Yeah.
I don't know that one, but I do know that Dembski made a tour of Canadian universities a few years ago, cultivating supporters. One of them is at McMaster. Do you have a McMaster school up there? Yeah, they have made efforts to cultivate Canadian followers. I'm sorry, your question then?
Well, I wanted to know if you had read or seen this book, because lately I was doing a minor in cognitive science. I started to notice that more and more teachers in the psychology field have been talking using the ID lingo,
oh, really?
that kind of expressions. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that Dembski is really high on is the idea. Well, they're defending just traditional dualism, that the mind is separate from the body. And I think that's why they're attracted to neuroscience, and they're trying to get some neuroscientists, to come in with them to argue for this type of dualism, because they regard Darwin as responsible for turning society into the, the materialistic culture that has undermined the whole idea of the belief in the soul, and therefore the immortality of the soul. I'm not familiar with that book, but I do know that they are cultivating supporters in that area of science. But I'm sorry, I can't talk about that book. But they are doing that. So I'm sorry, I don't know that one.
The book is about dualism, actually. So.
But they are cultivating supporters in universities. They probably have supporters in every university on the continent. Not that they're numerous and it's not a tidal wave of support, but they are there. And they're working this material into some of their classes, especially honors seminars, freshman seminars, which are outside the core curriculum. So ID is being taught in some universities. Thank you. Maybe you're one of my cousins or something, You sound like you could be. Okay.
I'm just curious. We all agree that ID shouldn't be taught in biology, but my question is, should biologists teach about ID? In other words, a lot of these arguments, these keywords that they bring up, they say it violates thermodynamics, entropy, fine-tuning of the numbers of the universe, the Kalam cosmological argument. All these things aren't taught in biology classrooms. So even somebody who takes valid biology, when a Christian comes up and says, but what about all this? And I learned all this stuff from my pastor that is masqueraded as science. I still can't, I'm not really prepared to answer that. So should biology teachers, are they now forced to teach about the ID arguments in order to fend off?
That question comes up all the time, and my answer is no. The problems that young people are bringing, the questions that they're bringing into these, whether it's a high school class or a college class, were not generated by the biology teacher. It was these kids are being put in this position by their parents and their pastors, their religious advisors. And it's those people's responsibility to work out the difficulties that they've created for these kids. Teaching science is hard enough without having to ask scientists to become philosophers of religion and theologians. And it's not helpful to try to put that task on their shoulders. Not that they should not be informed about it, because they darn well should, and they should be helping us more than they are. The scientific community should be helping. Some are, but most are not. They should be able to speak knowledgeably about it in some context other than the formal presentation of their subject matter, certainly. But and sometimes people ask me, so no, it shouldn't be taught in their science classes. Now, I do sometimes cover it in my History of Western Thought class, but I do so very overtly critical of it because I want my students to understand that this is not anything that is established by good scholarship. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But as far as teaching it, some people suggest it should be taught, it's okay to teach it to kids at the secondary level in a social studies class or in a comparative religion class. But in any class, if you go in and you tell kids here that intelligent design is science, that is false. And to tell kids that is to lie to them. Not only that, so you can violate the Constitution in a sociology class or a social science class just as you can in a science class. But I don't know how many of you have read their stuff carefully, but it is so dishonest. Their scholarship, first of all, it's very poor, and it's also very dishonest. And if you're going to teach anything in a comparative religion class, you want the very best scholarship. You don't want to waste time with that kind of drivel. It's going to be very easy for them to get that elsewhere. They can get it in their youth ministries and stuff like that, but I have no sympathy for teaching it as a respectable area of study. I do cover it in some of my classes, but only in such a way as to critique it. And only with my graduate students, and in a special class I taught on the history and principles of evolution, but not as good scholarship and certainly not as science.
Hello, my name's Elliot Reedman. I'm a law student at DePaul University. And I wanted to...
DePaul or DePaul?
DePaul in Chicago.
With an L. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Could you explain why the Dover case didn't reach the Supreme Court? And as a kind of replaying of the Scopes trial, what would you consider or foresee as a possible judicial step for the intelligent design movement in the future if they did want to try to take the case to the Supreme Court? And additionally, how would you speculate, based on the makeup of the current Supreme Court, how they might find?
Whoa, you gave me a whole string of stuff to answer.
Sorry,
there. Okay.
Too many questions.
Okay, you might have to remind me what they all are. First of all, the Discovery Institute has really wanted a court case for a very long time. They published their legal strategy in the Utah Law Review in July 2000, so they really have been itching for a court case because they want to, they think they can really win, but they wanted it in an area which was a very conservative. They've been shopping for districts, judicial districts, and they thought either Kansas or Ohio would be just ideal, and that so far they have not got a lawsuit out of either one of those places, so it came out of left field at them in Dover, which was the Middle District of Pennsylvania. It's on the Third Circuit. And so Judge Jones's ruling only applies in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, only there. Technically, but it is so well written, it's so thorough, it's so comprehensive. One woman called it judicial poetry, which it is. This case was much more like the McLean case in Arkansas in 1981, much more like it than it was like the Scopes case. And the McLean case only went to the federal district court level, and it's had a very powerful effect on other judges ever since, because Judge Overton in that case went through the characteristics of science, and spelled it out, what a discipline has to do to qualify as science. So even though that was not a Supreme Court decision, McLean versus Arkansas, it's had it is an integral part of the legal precedent. But now, so Judge Jones's decision is like that one. Now, the reason it was not appealed was because by the time he handed down his decision, the new school board had been in office now for about a month. There was a school board election on November 8th, which was about 4 days after the trial ended. And all of the creationists, there were 8 seats of 9 that were up for grabs, and all 8 went to pro-science people. It was close, but all of the creationists were just wiped right out of office. And so the new board certainly was not unhappy with the ruling and had no intention of not only of appealing it, but of incurring any further legal costs for the system. Now, I think I even remember your last question was about the Supreme Court, right? That makes me feel good since I'll be 55 later this month. I think they really would. The Discovery Institute really would love to get this before the Supreme Court. They would love to generate to generate a legal case in a district where they really do think they own the judges this time, and where they could, especially if they could get a conflicting ruling in another circuit, that's when the Supreme Court might be more likely to take a case. And I think they especially now maybe like the makeup of the court a little bit better. But I'm not so sure I don't know where it will go, but and what the court would do. But the way they might get another case now, the Discovery Institute's kind of focusing on getting this intelligent design at the local level. They haven't had much luck working with state boards of education. It generates a lot of negative publicity, and they've lost every effort in Kansas, Ohio. So they would love to get one using the sanitized terminology at the local level, where they could get it in at the local level, and there might be nobody really enforced to contest it. I think that's what they're looking at doing now, dropping it down, working with local school boards. And we do have a science curriculum policy in Ouachita Parish that is just exactly like what they were hoping for. In fact, the Discovery Institute was very happy that this policy was adopted. And so far, nothing's been done about it, but there is one.
Hi, William Mount from University of Guelph.
Yep.
Okay, reading some of Wells's and Dembski's stuff, it's hard to see how they could just, accidentally be this horribly wrong. It seems like they're...
how they could accidentally be so horribly wrong?
Yes, and it does seem that they're intentionally sort of misrepresenting things. They certainly have to be aware of all the mistakes in their books over these years. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering, what you could sort of comment maybe on their psychology of this. How can they just keep continually presenting the exact same viewpoint all this time without ever admitting any errors or anything like that?
These people are fanatics. They are, and I kind of like Ken Miller. He said, I've stopped trying to psychoanalyze these guys. But if you look in almost every case, these people in Dembski's case, Philip Johnson's case, Wells is kind of the odd bird because he's a Mooney, which they don't seem to mind very much, by the way. But there was some life-changing religious experience, some conversion. Dembski and his parents had sort of a group conversion when he was in college. Johnson's wife left him, and he had a born-again experience at the age of 38, and a traumatic personal dilemma, which he has talked about, by the way. I'm not, gossiping on him. He talks about this. And so in these cases, religion is the reason. It has nothing to do with science. It's just that they are using science as their vehicle. And the reason that they keep doing this, despite the fact that they've been discredited time and time again, is because it's really not about the truth. It's not about science. It's about power. It's about who will control public policy. It's about who will control educational policy, because they know if they're going to change the culture back to the Christian foundations that it should be on, they got to get hold of the kids. And so you have to look at the intelligent design movement as precisely what it is. It's an integral component of the religious right. It's just, intelligent design is the Discovery Institute's logistical contribution to the decades-old effort, which is about 40 years old now, to get back the public school system and to get prayer back in and Bible reading and all of that. These people really do want to change the government. And they're getting a lot of help from Regent Law School, I'll tell you, if you paid attention to the news lately. But it's about religion and power. That's one of the oldest stories in the book, and that's why they continue to lie to the American people.
Thanks.
It's not new.
I have a question about the new terminology that's even replacing intelligent design. It's been suggested, like P.Z. Myers especially, has argued that with this new terminology, they're just going to put out, oh, here's a book about evolution and include some misinformation, but without the phrases like intelligent design, it'll be hard to show that it's an establishment clause violation, because, Dover was all about the establishment clause, and you have to link it to religion, and that with this new tactics, it'll be almost impossible to link it to religion, and so the legal strategy will fail. As someone who's been involved in this, what's your perspective on that? Will it become harder? Or?
Well, that's one of the areas in which my work is most relevant. There are some people who are fairly pessimistic about this, looking at the sanitized terminology and thinking that this is going to cause us a lot of legal headaches. But I really don't think so, because they can't cleanse it completely. Notice that in Explore Evolution, okay, the irreducible complexity is in that book, and that you can tie that directly to intelligent design, and intelligent design directly to creation science. What you have to do, it's very, very important, and we stressed this in working with the attorneys to get the case ready, and the judge took note of it, is you have to establish the historical context very clearly, and you have to establish the historical, let's say the evolutionary line of descent from creation science to intelligent design, and that's very easy to do. This was predictable, because creationists have always done this. Every time they lose a case in federal court, they have to change their strategy, and they change their terminology a little bit. It's very consistent historically over the last 40 years since the 1960s, and so it's going to be very easy to show this historical context out of which this sanitized terminology comes. So only a judge who completely ignored the historical context, which Antonin Scalia did in the Edwards case. He just discounted the historic. He wanted to take the word of the Louisiana legislators just at face value. Oh, religious purpose? Who, us? No. And he believed him, And so, unless you have a judge like Justice Scalia, other judges who look at the historical context, and Judge Jones did, they're going to see this. It's just another of their little tricks, and it's going to be very easy to establish that in court, I think.
I want to go back to an earlier question about the role of science teachers in this, and they're addressing the issues of intelligent design. I heard a different question than I think you answered, so I don't know, but I'm going to... I think that teachers do need to know the types of things that you've presented to us today, so that when this comes up, they are prepared to show why intelligent design is not science. That's the question that I heard the young man ask. Maybe I heard it incorrectly. He
was asking me if I thought if intelligent design if biology professors, and I thought he was talking about the college level. It sounded to me, I wasn't sure, but should biology professors teach about this, in their classes.
Okay. Well, then my issue is, yes, they should teach about it in that, or at least be prepared to discuss why it is not just bad science, but not science.
Oh, I
In
agree.
other
To the
words,
extent that it comes up,
yes.
they need to be prepared to say that, yes.
Exactly. And you also made a comment, and I think that's a very, very important issue about whether it's the academic disciplines themselves or the professional organizations of the science teachers not doing enough to defend their own sciences. And, where are the biology teachers? Where's the National, Association of Biology Teachers in doing this? I'm not saying that they haven't made statements and things, but it seems like this fight is being made by people other than the science educators
Yes,
themselves.
it's largely by non-scientists like me.
Yeah, and what can be done, or do you have any ideas about how we can better educate the teachers themselves, the professors themselves, and get this information into their hands?
Yes, my co-author, who is a scientist, a retired scientist, and I do have some ideas. And if you'd like to see some of the recommendations we make, I just posted an article on my website, www.creationismstrojanhorse.com. It's an article that he and I wrote for Noretta Kirtke's book. Her book is Scientific Values and Civic Virtues, and our article is The Wedge of Intelligent Design, Retrograde Science, Schooling, and Society, and you can download the PDF. There has to be a very thoroughgoing, a real overhaul of the way science teachers are trained. And they need to be trained more in terms of content, scientific content, and less in teaching methodology. Because that's very easy to learn. Methodology is very easy to learn. It's the content where teachers end up very poorly prepared. So the science teachers need to be better armed with the knowledge they need to ward off the challenges that they're now getting from their students who are being coached to challenge them. Schools of education need to revamp the way they're training teachers. Scientists need to realize that they got a great big old dog in this fight, and they had better start helping, because the science literacy in this country is not getting better, and in many ways it's getting worse. That the trick is to get them to do it. I think now that their own ox is getting gored, with people like James Hansen at NASA being muzzled, and they're directly suffering the effects of the attacks on science, they're more aware of the problem of intelligent design. Now, to give them some benefit of the doubt, everybody's busy. You don't get tenure and you don't get grants by chasing after creationists. But at some point, everybody has to do a little something. There are people who are willing to shoulder the biggest part of the burden, but we do need the help. And it would be nice if they would at least do things locally. And one of the things that everybody can do is to get involved in the public schools and go spend some time working with the science teachers and working with children in science. But this is a political fight. We can't, it's like Eugenie says, we can't cure it by throwing science at it. It is a political fight, and the best way to do it is to help solve the problem. This is my parting comment, is for enough people to stop electing public officials who go along with this crap.